Yo ho, all together, hoist the colors high. He ho, thieves and beggars, never shall we die.
So finally, we get the Nightrose reveals and some of the supporting units as well this past week and a half. Let's get right into it. Check out Dueling Guard's deck boxes, playmats, and binders. The great quality products that are anime based. They continually have more anime options becoming available. Use the affiliated link in the description for a 5% discount on your next purchase. So we got our boy Water Spout Jin, phenomenal artwork, thank goodness. Time to go see. I like this art too. It does exactly what you think the stride costs, and searching for the grade 3 Nightrose, which I'll highlight that later as well. Negro Lazy, so pretty cool artwork, and the 3 skills, hollow, and then the second skill is that when it's become hollow, other than the battle phase, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Nightrose, then you can counterblast 1 to choose a card from your drop and call it to rearguard. So right off the back, it does rely on the hollow mechanic. 2, they really limited this card being outside of the battle phase. I will talk more about that later on as well. But you can call something when you go first as grade 3, so you're not generation break locked with the skill. So that's something. And you can call of any grade, whereas in the original Negro Lazy in G era, it was grade 2 or less. And then the one in V series was just a grade 0. So thank goodness for that. The GB1 skill is that when it's hollowed and it's retired from Rearguard Circle, then you can, and if you have the name, Nightrose, and if you did not countercharge, then you countercharge 1. So this is our form of countercharging. It is a 1-for-1 though. If you plan to use his skill and then refund himself, which is what you expect from the G-Era Negro Lazy as well, but we really needed a skill that can call multiple units for 1 counterblast. This will make it a lot more resourceful. You could actually call this to rearguard from hand, hollow it, and just have it chill or become one of your attackers. And then when it's retired, you'll countercharge, so you can get sort of a free countercharge that way too. So give or take. Negro Bones, so at the end of the battle this boosted, if it was called from drop essentially, and you have Nightrose Crest, then retire this unit and draw a card. So I think they kind of shafted our boy, Negro Bone. They could have done actually a better job, because this could have been our attack extender, which I'll highlight that we did not get as a rearguard actually. So I think there was missed potential here. I wish it was just in general, because now you have to dedicate a revival skill on getting Negrabone to even get a draw potentially afterwards. So the question is, does Obadiah do that massive field call? And it's once per turn a card face up in the G zone, thank goodness, act. So we get immediate crest benefits. Look at the top 5, choose one of them, discard it, and then call a card from drop. And if it had the hollow ability, then it gets 5k onto the end of the turn. So it's not bad, but it's also not the greatest. And as I mentioned, there is no attack extenders from these both reveals of these past 2 weeks. So we are limited to a 3 attack turn. And I know most of you already feeling like, wow, this kind of sucks because you compare it to Shiranui, right? Who doesn't, right? Personally, I compare it to it because I do play the deck as well. So like, first stride, you're getting 5 normal attacks and then 2 dominations, and that's 7 attacks on first stride. And so if you are fighting for first stride against another deck set, or even just getting there as going second, like your first stride isn't that impactful as we hoped it to be. There might be ways to make this a little bit better too, but right off the back, it's not as obvious. But the moment you've been waiting for, Marauding Shade, and so phenomenal artwork. I gotta say, like, this looks sick. I'm definitely hoping for this guy to look really pop out nicely with these dark colors. So it has 3 skills, the hollow ability, and then the second one that when it does become hollow, if you have a Nightrose Crest, this gets 5k until the end of the turn, and if your drop has 10 or more, it gets 10k instead. So it's a 10k base with the additional 5 or 10k base, makes it a 15-20k beater, which is, you know, appreciated. And then the third skill is that when it's placed on Guardian Circle, if you have the crest, this gets 5k shield, and if your drop has 10 or more, this gets 10 shield instead of 5. That's actually not bad, making this a 10k shield or a 15k shield. It's actually pretty straightforward to get to the 10 in drop for this deck too. I've been play testing a bit already. So the 15k shield does come up. In fact, this is something that I will highlight with other cards that you should get to reoccur this card on turn by turn to be able to like have some guard value to help you survive and essentially get to the Nightrose turn, which is this phenomenal artwork. The skill is good, which I'm grateful for. And this GB2 skill, obviously you need the Nightrose grade 3 for cost for striding. But when it attacks a Vanguard, you can CB1, retire 2 rearguards, and choose up to 2 grade 2 or greater cards with different names from each other from the dropping column to rearguard. Then if your drop has 10 or more cards, this unit gets critical +1. And then if you have 15 or more, those units get 10k, which is phenomenal. So a couple things to note. So our second stride will be Nightrose for sure. This is literally our attack extender. This gets us to 5 attacks currently, which we need to even make some impactful turn. So if this is our second stride turn, we really need to start pushing some numbers and also some pressure. I'm glad that they gave the additional crit to the Vanguard. So now your Vanguard isn't so like, 1, it could be the weakest attack, and 2, if it has nothing else besides extended attacks, then your opponent might take the Vanguard straight to the face. But with the additional crit, it forces them to guard against the Vanguard and makes it easier for your follow-up 4/5 attack, harder to guard that. Plus, if you get any bunkers triggers, then you just stack them onto the remaining rearguards that can still attack, right? The other thing to note is that the power 10k not only helps with that, but it makes up for the crest power-up. What do I mean by that is that first stride, we're flipping with Obadiah, and so by the time we stride this, there's 2 Obadiahs flipped up or 1-on-1, depending on what we flip. So essentially, the crest power-up is only 10k for that turn. And if this doesn't flip anything, that's all we get for our second stride, which is not the greatest, but the 10k makes up for it. So essentially, those last units will at least see like a plus 20k in addition to whatever their skills are. So that helps make up for the crest power-up, because if you play Shiranui, you realize you don't go into Makuro as often. You're pretty much going back to back with Magen Tembu, and each time you use Magen Tembu, you're flipping a card face up, and then your following turn, because there's 2 more cards now face up, it's another 10k. So each turn you accumulate 10k more power, where it just scales really crazy in the Shiranui deck. So this kind of makes up for that essentially. And then the next turn, if you go into a second Nightrose, you'll have 3 cards face up, which is 15 for the initial attacks, and of course the plus 10k will make like a 25 for the last 2 attacks essentially. How do I feel about this? I would say they did shaft a bit, because this card, I think Marauding Shade is a good indicator where they realized the deck sets with multiple attacks will scale out of control, and it's just insane how powerful that is. Standard has low shields to begin with, unless you use like those special blitz orders on top of playing like Sectitude and some of those special heals, but they're just very situational, and also you have to make room for them in the main deck, all these things. And so most of the time you may see like a card or 2 in certain decks that have extra shield cards essentially. They're, at least with granblue, they're playing this where Marauding Shade is not only your attacker, because you'll call this, but it also is higher shield that you can use. Which brings up the question of the Nightrose crests, where the third skill essentially lets us, when 3 or more cards are discarded from the deck by your Vanguard's ability, you can basically bottom deck one of those cards. So this led us to believe that either we're going to rely on Nightrose's GB2 skill, or somehow Obadiah was gonna also influence that, so we can use this skill from the crest. And it turns out that it is Nightrose GB2 skill that we're going to be using, because Marauding Shade will retire itself because of Hollow. We've used that as a beater, but now Nightrose can mill 3 to revive it, and now we return 1 card back. And this helps us, 1, get closer to the 15 cards in the drop zone, so that way the Nightrose turn is much more impactful. But if you were still short of 10 or 9 or less in the drop zone, now Marauding Shade is online to its maximum shield value. You can intercept with it because it is put, not placed. So you can intercept with it, get the maximum value, and then also any additional Marauding Shades you have in your hand, you have bigger shield. So essentially they're making higher shield cards so that way you survive, but I still feel like we could have appreciated a 4th attack with Obadiah stride turn, at least. I think that would have been big and balanced for the deck in that way. So then they have these 2 vanguards that promote attacks, and the rearguards can just focus on everything else, essentially what the deck needs. To make Nightrose a very impactful turn, I am reliant on beaters. So Nightstorm actually may see play. I'm currently playing 3. You could play 2 if you want to, but since you have to call different names, then you would call this and Marauding Shade in opposing columns. And this makes it a lot harder for your opponent to deal with. Again, with the crest, you're not flipping as much, so the additional 10k from Marauding Shade and Nightstorm is definitely appreciated. So you're making easily 33k plus numbers to 43 and so on moving forward. So now you may be asking yourself, okay, what do I get for standard that really makes this deck tick at least? So 2 cards for sure, Sea Strike and Largov, and then of course the grade 2 Cycler card. So the Sea Strike card will actually reoccur your grade 3s and your grade 2s, which is Marauding Shade, your Night Roses that you need to pitch for the Nightrose Strike cost to help you with that. And also you can get cards like Nightstorm that you can just actually call from hand normally and hollow it still. You'll still get the benefits. So you're not using a counterblast to revive something straight from the drop zone. And that's how you can moderate your counterblast as well and not have to rely so much on that or on Negro Lazy as much as well. You could also recycle the Cyclers itself too if you feel like you need to guard with 1 card pokes. And as you do your riot line, you're going to discard those grade 2 Cyclers to draw advantage. This is really needed for the deck to build up enough hand to have some shield value, but also survive the early game too. And then late game, you could always revive those cards if you don't have access to another copy of Marauding Shade, if it's already on the field, for example, too. It could also help dig deeper into your deck a little bit too, because you're trying to not only get to the 10 and drop, but you're also now getting to 15. So that way, with Nightrose's turn, it's really impactful. The next 2 cards that I also recommend is Philander and also Azure Sky. So Philander is, in a way, a better version of Cam the Ghosty. Cam the Ghosty is like their hollow version and stuff like that. But you can get easily to the 10 count, which makes Philander a lot more bigger. 18k booster, worst case scenario, 18k attacker, and then with the crest, with just having 1 card face up makes him a 23k hitter if you really don't have much going on besides that too. So Philander is pretty good, and then of course both Cam and Philander have to be called from hand to be able to mill something, essentially. So they're pretty much the same card, just Philander is a bigger benefit at the end. And you really don't rely on the hollow keyword, at least just yet with this deck set. If in future support, if they make more cards, maybe. So, but just keep mindful. And if you're on a budget too, because Philander has gone up in price too, I'm sure you can get away with Cam in most cases. I've noticed even with playtesting, you're more focused on reviving your front row riggers that are beaters, that you may not either have resources to revive additional boosters or just have enough in hand to be able to survive as well. So you're not trying to commit a lot to the board from hand if possible too. Azure Sky is a lot putting in work right now. With playtesting too, I noticed Nightrose does not have an early game whatsoever. Just like with Shiranui, we saw with the Shoto Doji support, and now they're using Soaring Sun because of the restriction in effect. Even that card is putting in work with Shiranui. Shiranui is so a force to be reckoned with, not only in the English, but it's still showing up representation in the Japanese metagame alongside with the Shoto Doji deck as well too. So when I compare this power scaling with Nightrose, I'm comparing it to both those decks too. So having cards that call something in the early game is much appreciated. And Azure Sky is interesting because you can actually use its skills to check the top card to either mill it or leave it on top. So you got like a revelation / milling aspect to it. And if it's a trigger, 9 times out of 10, you're going to leave it on top. If it's a combo piece, then you just mill it, which adds to the count, which is what you want. And then you can use the additional counterblast cost to revive something that's grade 2 or greater. So you can basically just call a grade 2 cycler just to have another body and can intercept with it, or just later on you can even use it to revive like your Nightstorm or even like your Largov, and you can kind of like just see the top card as well. And if you need to like leave the card on top because of a trigger, or maybe it's a combo piece, you know your pattern of attacks, or you just mill those depending on what you need for that current game state essentially. So Azure Sky, I think, is putting in work. It has to be called from hand, but it's okay because I noticed with Sea Strike, this is another target that you can recycle back with Largov if you really need it in the late game. But for the early game, it's more vital. And in the early game, you're not really reviving cards as much because it's a slow start type of deck. You don't have much in the drop zone. You have to work for it to start building a quantity, but also quality of drop zone for cards to even be revived, right? So That's why that card still works, and it's primarily for the early game. You can still play a few copies of Necrolacy, which could be 2 to 3. It's not the main card, and honestly, it is our counter charger, but you can also kind of use it just to get the counter charge and not really use its skill to revive something else and use something else to build your field. That's more resource efficient in a sense. A card to consider is Impix. Just like in Premium, Impix is used against the Shiranui matchup. So if they do an Arboro Revival, or if you just have a column of rearguards already, they can't dominate, especially in Standard. Like, they cannot dominate with a Boro skill, they cannot do it with Magantambu, and they cannot do it with Makuro. They cannot dominate whatsoever. So if you want to tech Impix, just like we do in Premium, you could do that in Standard too if that's a concern matchup. Probably 1 to 2 copies just to be able to see it just in time. And remember, like, if you want to rely on Nightrose's GB2 skill to mill 3, revive Marauding Shade, you have a rearguard on board now. So how can you maximize on the shield value from that, but without giving Nubatama the advantage of domination, right? And then, of course, Magun Temple will retire your Marauding Shade, which kind of defeats the purpose too. Onto Premium. And so what's really exciting about this is just more options besides the crest build. I'm actually already experimenting with that. With the new cards though, I think Necrolacy was this close to being very good and very useful with a crest build. I'm actually experimenting with Necrobone G, and that calls hollow units, and this would have been a hollow target that it can call, and now you can call something else, but also countercharge along the way too, which would have been phenomenal. But the fact that they limited to outside of the battle phase, man, they shafted us, and it really hurts. So much for Necrolacy. But with the strides, there is some flexibility in niche cases that you can consider. Obadiah in this case is better, there's pros and cons. I don't think this Obadiah is better than its original Obadiah. It's not like the old Obadiah where you mill 3 and then revive a ghost if you mill 2 or more hollow units. It's for no damage plays. You get to flip something, which is good for the crest if you're using it. You kind of like mill selectively still, while also getting a revive if you're choosing to. Old Obadiah still works because you could just mill Beatrice into 2 hollow units and then use Beatrice, even though it's revived behind the Vanguard, you can use Beatrice to revive whatever you want still. So this card may not be used in Premium, to be quite frank, but it is an option there. You can see it as like a no damage type of play, essentially. However, Nightrose though, there are cases where you don't want to bad bounty just yet, or you cannot. And then there's also the cases where Bartholomew is short on the 30 count. And essentially, if you don't have the Nightrose V available to you, you can stride into this, assuming that you have a Nightrose G copy to pay the cost of stride, of course. And now you have multi-attack still available to you. You have crit pressure. You also have beefy column units to take advantage of it. And then you can build your field to attack extend still with like Nightstorm G, essentially, or even Riveting Frange, for example. So you can make that turn still pretty good as kind of like an optional stride. I would only play 1 copy of this, if so, in finding the room in the G zone as well. If you're playing 3 Bad Bounty and you're playing like a crest build, I think you can reduce Bad Bounty to 2 and add the Nightrose there, and that also shines more in the crest build because you are promoting more rearguard attacks too. So those are some cards and suggestions and thoughts that I have at this point too. I've done initial playtesting a bit just to get a feel for the deck and see what it's lacking when it's needed, and I pretty much highlighted a lot of what people have agreed to and the little things that could help the deck too. I think it's worth exploring more of the stoicheia card pool to see if like there's other options, maybe other interactions that I have not seen yet. And it's also just releasing this weekend in Japan, so we'll see eventually deck lists coming out and also what people are trying over there and seeing how it fares against the meta too. I honestly will give this a chance still, regardless in Standard. I just like granblue overall, so that's my passion, my enthusiasm for it. Anyway, in Premium, you best believe I got some goodies to share with y'all soon enough. You know, stay tuned for sure. It's just very cool stuff to play with in general for both formats, so I'm excited for that. If you guys have any thoughts or suggestions too, I'd love to hear anything just to make this build too. I've theory crafted with a few people too, their ideas too, and it's just, there's a couple ways we can take this deck still. So there's hope at that point, right? If you want to support the channel, use affiliate links such as 50 card shop, trading card mint, etc. Especially if you haven't pre-ordered your deck sets just yet. I actually pre-ordered mine with 50 card shop too, both this and the Harry deck, so I'm excited for this in both formats too. Till next time, amigos.